It's appreciated.
All right, welcome to the launch of Tell the Rest with Lucy Jane Bledsoe and Kirsten Valdez-Quaid. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of Bureau of General Services Queer Division, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum. And the Bureau, for those of you who are new, is a government agency or government that does not yet exist. And we hope it comes into being soon because we need it desperately. In the meantime, we hold this space for queer culture. We have regular bookstore hours, Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then we do a lot of events that are in the evenings. So if you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room, and you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. We keep a pretty busy calendar. So as you may have seen in the event description, we do have a suggested donation of $10. But we always say, give what you can, if you can. And if you have money that you'd rather spend on books, you should hold on to that money and buy books. But if you're not buying books, it'd be nice if you could drop a little something in here to keep this going. There you go, thank you. There's change in there if you need it. You can also donate to us on Venmo at BGSQB, which are the 5 letters that are all around you on every box in this room. So before I introduce our guests, I'm going to read a quick land acknowledgement, and then we'll get started. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We are actively seeking to partner with and provide material support to a local queer Indigenous organization. We hope to make an announcement about this partnership in the near future. But in the meantime, we encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community House's Mannahatta Fund. So yes, I'm asking you for donations, and then we give donations. That's how it goes. Move it around, move it around. It's a shell game. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. So we are very happy to welcome Lucy Jane Bledsoe back. I think it's her 4th reading with us. I'm especially glad since Donnie and I were on vacation last time she read here. So good to have you back, Lucy. Lucy is the author of several works of fiction, including A Thin Bright Line, which was a Lambda Literary Award and Farrell Grumley Award finalist. She is the winner of an American Library Association Stonewall Award, a Yaddo Fellowship, a California Arts Council Fellowship in Literature, 2 National Science Foundation Artists and Writers Fellowships, and a finalist for the Northern California Independent Booksellers Association Fiction Award. A native of Portland, Oregon, she now lives in Berkeley, California. Tell the Rest is her latest work. And Kirsten Valdez-Quaid is the author of The 5 Wounds, which won the Center for Fiction's first novel prize and the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and was a finalist for the Penn Hemingway Award and the Lambda Literary Award. Her story collection, Night at the Fiestas, won the John Leonard Prize from the National Book Critics Circle, the Sue Kaufman Prize for First Fiction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and a 5 Under 35 Award from the National Book Foundation. Her work has appeared in the New Yorker, the Best American Short Stories, the O. Henry Prize Stories, the New York Times, and elsewhere. She teaches at Princeton, and in September will join the faculty of the Stanford Creative Writing Program. Please give them a very warm welcome.
I'm so happy that Kirsten's coming back to California.
So happy to be going back to California. And I'm so happy to get to be here tonight to talk to Lucy about this gorgeous new novel. Tell the Rest. I mean, I I have to be really careful because I never mind spoilers because I often forget. But I'm gonna really be careful. But I will just say that when I finished this the other night, I was weeping, and it's such I mean, it's just a beautiful, bright novel, large-hearted, and so I'm really excited to get to talk to you about everything that went into creating this.
Thank you for those kind words. And I also want to thank Greg and Dawn for hosting, I guess, for the fourth time. I love reading here at the center. It's always such a warm, friendly place. And I want to thank my publisher for Tell the Rest, Johnny Temple, and Johanna, also Ingalls, who are here, and my publishers for my last book, which was a YA book, No Stopping Us Now. Kat and Peter are here. So it's just a wonderful crowd, and friends of mine from Berkeley are here. 4 friends of mine from Berkeley, actually. So thank you all for being here, and all the rest of you. I really appreciate it. Oh, and I have to do a shout out to Bella, who has done some wonderful posts today. Really appreciate their energy and enthusiasm around my work. It's what makes doing this work worthwhile is the friends and the community. It really is. I'm not just saying that. So thank you all.
Maybe on that note about community, I can just ask, so this is not giving anything away or much, only the first couple pages maybe. To say that when the novel opens, your protagonist, Delia Barnes, has her life has blown up. Her wife has left her for the gender studies,
A women's studies
professor. She's lost her job as a basketball coach at an elite Ivy, unnamed, and no, it's not unnamed.
It's fictional.
But okay. Yeah. And she returns to her childhood home to teach basketball at her high school. And I mean, this really is, I mean, you spoke about community, and this, among many other things, this novel is a portrait of a community on the edge of the country. It's on the coast of Oregon, a small city or town. And will you talk about that community and what Delia finds?
Yeah, I mean, your question is, I want to go in so many directions with that. But I'm going to start about why I wrote this book, actually, because that takes me to the community issue. I started it from a place of feeling over the last few years when that last person was in the White House and a lot of stuff that was happening, a sense of enormous rage. And I'm not a rageful person. I'm not particularly angry. And I had this huge abundance of rage. I didn't know what to do with it. I don't think any of us knew what to do with that rage. And I also didn't understand why they were so angry at some of us. And so I started writing about that rage. And last event, and someone asked, what's the first scene you wrote? Which was an interesting question. I realized the first thing I wrote, and this also is not a spoiler because it's near the beginning, is when my protagonist throws a kid against a locker. She loses control right away. Her first day on the job in a high school, throws a kid against a locker and expresses that rage. So when I realized I wanted to write about that, and that I think is why many of us, at least why I'm a writer, so I can work through things I'm dealing with and thinking about and caring about. I also realized I did not want to spend, the next 4 or 5 years thinking and writing about rage. I mean, that sounded kind of hellish. So I took that question, what am I supposed to do with all this rage? And I flipped it. And I started doing research into happiness and peacefulness. And there's literally people study happiness. And there's a character in my book who I give this study to. We can talk about him a little later. But I wanted to, so I started looking into that and realized that I wanted to write a book where some of those things that create happiness, and they're things that probably all of us know, community, being in beautiful places. So for me, the Oregon coast, I thought perfect. I'll set it on the Oregon coast where I'm from. partially from, I'm also partially from Portland, Oregon. I'll deal with issues of community, deal with issues of creativity. One of my other protagonists is a poet. So I know a lot of, for me, healing and getting through rage and negative feelings is about doing creative work. So that's how I got to the community theme in the book. And there's been studies show that being a part of a committed community is a big ingredient to being happy. And interestingly, being a member of a church is one of those communities that gives people a lot of happiness. So you can see by the cross on the front of here, religion and church plays a big part in the story. Right now in this country, that community, I think, is a very complicated thing. And that's what this book is about. We'll talk about that later. But also being on teams is another committed community that can create happiness. So I made my main character a coach of a basketball team.
That's so interesting. So Delia's job came after.
It did actually. It did come after. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to write about, a basketball. I mean, my last book, No Stopping Us Now, was also about basketball. And I didn't mean to write about basketball again. Honestly, I write sort of leapfrogging. I don't remember which stories in my life I worked on first to be, people always think that you write the book that's being published now and then you wrote the next one. Yeah. In fact, they think as soon as you publish a book, then that's when you start the next one. But it doesn't work that way, at least for me. Anyway, I didn't set out to write about basketball, but having teams, besides writing fiction, teams are another way that I really found my voice and saved myself. And so I wanted to use that in this story.
Wow, okay, that's great. Yeah, I mean, and we learned early on that Delia has a rage problem. In fact, her psychologist's ex-wife diagnoses her with that in one of the most enraging scenes. It's so funny and awful. Funny because it's awful.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Delia moves back. She takes this sort of dawdling car trip back to her hometown. She's trying to push off the inevitable and rolls in just moments before her job is due to start at the high school. And will you talk about what she finds in this community? I mean, she hasn't been back in a while. Her brother's still there.
Yeah, she her high school boyfriend is the principal of the high school they went to. So he's there and he's hired her. And her brother's the janitor in the high school. So it's a small town on the Oregon coast. And so she knows a lot of the characters who are still there. One just a side piece that I wanted to deal with in terms of community again is, and this is a community, this is based on, we're not going to say the name of the town, but it's based on a town that Kirsten also knows on the Oregon coast. And what really interests me is urban America and how it's changing. And I really see this visually. I love driving, going on road trips. And this particular town on the Oregon coast, if you look at the census reports, it's like 97% white. If you're there, that is not the case. If you're in the grocery store, if you look at all the businesses, there's a whole lot of people of color, of Asian descent, of Hispanic descent, some Black folks. It's just a really mixed community. I wanted to talk about what happens in a small community in this country at this point in time, when everybody, in a small town, small country, when everybody is thrown together, BIPOC, queer, straight, what really happens. And I mean, actually, this is one thing I love about your novel, The Five Wounds, which came out 2 years ago, because it takes place in a small town in New Mexico and does a lot of the same thing in terms of mixing people up and showing what really is happening on a sort of a family community level when people from different backgrounds come together. And there's a lot of stereotypes and, they're not all true. So I wanted to work with that.
Well, there's a lot that Delia's dealing with. I mean, it's a novel about a homecoming. I mean, it's about memory. It's about returning to her childhood memories and to her home. And one of the things she confronts is that the community as it is now is not the community she left. I mean, and right off the bat, she sees differences. And not just because her sort of geeky boyfriend is now the principal.
Yeah. Well, are you thinking of some specific differences in particular?
I'm thinking about when the first moment she sets foot in the high school, she runs into Mickey, who is, I mean, to Delia's eyes, non-binary. She does, I mean, Delia wants to be careful about how Mickey is gendered. And there's this moment where, I mean, Jonas sort of snaps at her.
Right, well, and yes, that's a good example of the principal, who's her ex-boyfriend, but now the principal in the small high school. So Delia is talking to him about this character Mickey, and Jonas uses the pronouns she, her. And Delia says, well, how do you know those are her pronouns? And he kind of like stepped back and goes, Delia, we know about pronouns. So there's moments like that where she has to sort of like, okay, it's not the Hicks anymore.
Yeah. And, I mean, the novel is a series of these sort of readjustments.
Yeah.
Has to make.
Yeah, on a lot of levels.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can talk about the sort of horrific core of the novel and the horrific core of Delia's experience. Really, is this summer she spent when she was 13 at a conversion therapy camp. She's recommended to this camp or sent by her pastor, who has discovered that she's showing some lesbian tendencies.
Well, he finds her making out with her friend.
So
yes, I'm glad you asked that question, because the first couple of events I did, I tried not to talk about conversion therapy, and I realized that is the trauma at the heart of this novel. But I was so afraid I would turn readers off, or that they'd go running screaming. And I mean, if I do say, oh, it's a novel about conversion therapy, they usually go, whoa. I will say, and I'm, other people said this, it's not a downer novel. So I want to tell you, well, don't worry, it won't depress you. I really want upbeat comedy about it.
No, and when I said that I cried, it was happy tears. I mean, it was the best kind of crying when I got to the end.
But I mean, it really is the thing where I'm much more interested in how, rather than writing about trauma, I'm much more interested in how people heal and how they come together. And the whole question of community, what does that mean? And who does support her? This character I have who almost has a PhD in happiness studies, and how he contributes. So those are the things that interest me more. And I'm not, what's the word when not like, I deal with the conversion therapy, but not, what is it, sweet talking it. I'm losing the word I want, but anyway. However, after doing a couple of events where I avoided talking about conversion therapy, I realized that it's important to say a couple of things about it, because it is at the heart of this, and it's at the heart of the rage that I started with in writing it. When I started thinking about, okay, I want to deal with this rage that I have and that I see others have, and write a story that starts there. I was looking at, where that rage comes from, and I really realized it's a continuum. And we have to listen to Ron DeSantis on the news, this week. It's the same thing as these people who send kids to conversion therapy camp. It's just a continuum. And it's an emotional violence for me to listen to these people on the TV right now. And so I just figured I'd go to the belly of the beast, go all the way to this conversion therapy bit, which is sort of the most heinous expression, especially since they target youth or families who are afraid of what's happening to their kids. And so I did an event a couple weeks ago with a lawyer for Born Perfect, which is this amazing organization that exists solely to fight conversion therapy. And they literally track practitioners of this horrible practice all over the country. And because my book took place in Oregon, she was telling me the facts about that. There's 52 today practitioners of conversion therapy in Oregon. I mean, today, 2023. And these people can get away with it because you don't need a license. All you need is a basement or a camp. And I mean, there's no, it's only illegal in about 50% of the states in this country. And it was first illegal in California in 2012, which is quite recent. There's 700,000 people alive today in this country who have been through conversion therapy of some form or other. So it's really much more prevalent, I think, than people realize, especially in the progressive communities that most of us move in, because we think, oh, everybody's cool. There's Ellen, there's Pete Buttigieg. Everybody's good now. But, you know, if, for instance, you leave Portland, Oregon and drive around, you know, Pat and I went to, we did a, just a tour during COVID around in some of the rural areas. And oh boy, you know, it's not pretty out there. Oh, it's beautiful, but pictures of the people, there's gigantic signs about that other person who used to be president everywhere. So anyway, I forget the question, but so that's why I decided to just go for it, go into it. But I mean, the one thing I will say, another part, and maybe I'll read a little bit after I say this part because it relates to it. That I was really interested in the research I did. I did a whole bunch of, watched a lot of videos of people who spoke about their experiences in conversion therapy, and I talked to a few people in person. I did a lot of research into it. And one thing that I found was most of these young people, and it's mostly young people, not all, know at the time, as they're going through it, that it's batshit crazy, you know, but they're like, you know, 15, 16, you know, they're threatened with the loss of the love of their family. They're threatened with the loss of the only community they've ever known, which is usually their church. They're threatened with going to hell. So they're going through this. And I mean, honestly, more often than not, when people talk about their experiences at these camps, you know, they're all hooking up. So they're like, so they're praying away the gay in the morning and finding boyfriends and girlfriends of the same sex in the afternoon. I mean, it's just, there's this one woman, I think it's Patty Sheehan. She's now a city commissioner for Orlando, Florida. So she's a bright, educated person. And I listened to her videotape about her experience. And when she was like 16, she had all these pastors surrounding her, and they literally told her that the evil, the homosexuality would leave her body if she prayed hard enough in the form of an orange mucus. And I mean, I'm talking about, you know, less than 10 years ago. So, and she never did that. But, you know, what do you do? So I got really interested in that bit where these kids often are mocking it even while they're there. And yet they're there because they're kids.
And they don't have a choice.
And they don't have a choice usually. I mean, they're sent. And often their parents, I found, don't understand what they've sent their kids to either. So I made that the case with my two characters. They don't quite realize what they're sending their kids off to.
Yeah, one of the and maybe this is in the section you'll read, but when Delia gets there and she feels so lucky to have been chosen to go to this camp and so grateful to her pastor for picking her, and yeah, because she has no idea that the whole camp is organized around, you know, beating out of her, you know, who she is.
I'll read that section. This is about a 5-minute bit. Yeah, so she's only 13. She's really tall for her age, so they didn't quite realize how young she was. And yeah, her pastor found her making out with her girlfriend, threatened her with, said she had to come to these therapy sessions with him. She refused to do that. So he called her mother and said he was sending her to this camp, and he didn't tell her mother what was going on. So yeah, she thought she thought he'd kind of given her a pass and was just sending her to a Christian camp. And she'd just been shown at the boats and the art classes, and she's just been there about a day or so. So this is from her point of view at the summer camp. Best of all, though, were the other campers. It was as if someone had gathered all the quirky, expressive kids and left behind the terrifyingly ordinary ones. One girl could name every plant she saw, including the tiny mosses and lichens. One boy did perfect imitations of celebrity dance steps, including some by a dead guy named Fred Astaire. For about a day and a half before she caught on, Delia thought she'd landed in a magical place. And that first night, with her flashlight under the covers of her sleeping bag, she used a piece of the stationery which she had brought to write Shauna, her girlfriend, to instead write a note thanking Pastor Quaid for giving her this chance, for giving her the scholarship. The next day at breakfast, Delia asked Maureen to please mail the letter. The counselor told her that campers weren't allowed to send or receive mail. That struck Delia as strange. But celebration camp had a sealed feeling, a secret garden kind of vibe, and so it made a funny kind of sense. Anyway, Maureen kept the letter, putting it in her back pocket. Maybe she'd break the rule for Delia this time. After all, the letter was to her pastor. That morning after chores, the campers gathered in the dining hall for dating lessons. This too surprised Delia. She'd gone to a couple of school dances and had been fine. She liked to dance. Her brother Dylan and his girlfriend were already dating by then, but they just sort of hung out. Delia hadn't been aware of any protocols or rules. It was interesting, the idea that there was something she needed to learn about dating. Why not? She felt pleasantly curious as she took her seat at the class. Pastor Bob and Maureen checked campers off a list to make sure everyone was in attendance. The scary-looking counselor, Malcolm, with his hollow cheeks and sharp jutting jawline, stood to the side, hand clasped behind his back. Though they were indoors, he hadn't removed his sunglasses. "Hey, Delia Barnes," Maureen called out. "Come on over here." She stood next to Pastor Bob at a distance from the campers, and Delia went, still feeling special, selected, a scholarship recipient. "I'm thinking we could send Delia over to crafts, Maureen said to Pastor Bob. "Wade is there. He could do a project with her." Pastor Bob looked annoyed. "What?" "She's only 13, Maureen said this extra quietly, as if it was a mistake. Pastor Bob, who was a couple of inches shorter than Delia, looked up at her face. "Oh, I think our girl could handle a bit of dating advice. What do you say, Delia?" "Sure, yeah." "Good girl," he said, and turning to Maureen, he added, "That's why she's here." "She's young is all," Maureen said. Young, and according to Pastor Quaid, already active. Maureen nodded her acquiescence. "Take your seat," Pastor Bob said. Maureen gave Delia a confusing smile with her thin lips zipped tight. She looked both vexed and sympathetic. It was the jarring dissonance in that smile that first tipped Delia off to something being awry at this camp. But the dating class was kind of fun. In the first role-playing exercise, the boy asked the girl out, and the girl needed to use the appropriate amount of eye contact, very little, but enough, and words to accept or reject, depending on several factors, but mainly on whether or not he was a Christian. That made the game easy. If he was, you said yes. If he wasn't, you said no. You looked him in the face briefly when he began speaking to you, but then for the sake of modesty, you stared down at your own knees for most of the encounter because boys don't like aggressive girls. If the boy exhibited questionable behaviors, Pastor Bob's phrase, but was a Christian, this was a great deal for the girl. It was an opportunity. Girls, Pastor Bob explained, have a lot of responsibility to use their wiles, again, his word, to make boys and men better Christians. In the next exercise, the campers sat side by side on hard chairs, stand-in for movie theater car seats to practice conversation. Delia got paired with a tall boy named Ernest, one of the only 2 Black kids at the camp. At the beginning of the class, Pastor Bob told the whole group that Delia's height, the way she towered over most of the boys, would only exacerbate their already triggered feelings of masculine inadequacy. His need to explain gave the impression that the match, despite the height fit, had problems, and Delia understood his discomfort had to do with their skin color differences. She heard Ernest huff quietly. Throughout the start of the morning, as other couples performed in front of the group, Delia snuck looks at her assigned partner. Finally, he whipped his head around and widened his eyes, keeping his hands in his lap in a gesture minuscule. He spread his fingers in a wet gesture. Delia smiled, raised her hand, waved, even though she was sitting right next to him. He stared at her for a second before relaxing his shoulders and silently laughing. "You're a trip," he whispered. "Where are you from?" "Rockside." "Rock where?" "On the coast." "What coast?" "The Oregon coast." Poor child. "Why? Where are you from?" "Los fucking Angeles, where the ground is properly covered with pavement and buildings." Delia laughed and forgot to do it quietly. "Delia," Maureen scolded, "pay attention." Ernest widened his eyes at her again and whispered, "Girl, subterfuge, please, subterfuge." She didn't know what that word meant, but she liked her date. Ernest's ears and feet were too big for the rest of his body, giving him a sweetly mismatched appearance. She had already noticed his tendency to stumble. This morning he wore a t-shirt and khaki shorts, and the skin on his long arms and legs looked soft as if he used lotion religiously. When their turn came, both kids strived to ace the exercise, using the proper body and verbal language, making sure they followed the guidelines. But then Right after they'd been dismissed and Pastor Bob called up another pair, Ernest bowed to her and said too quietly for anyone else to hear, "Enchanted, I'm sure, darling." And Delia knew he was mocking the training. Delia held up her arm and made a muscle. "Girl," he said, still quietly, but with lots of feeling. At the break, the kids all spilled out of the dining hall and met in clusters on the edge of the meadow. Delia followed Ernest into the cool yellow sunshine. He stopped to talk to a thin, much shorter, ultra-pale boy with red-rimmed eyes. His white blonde hair had recently been sheared into a crew cut, so that the upper part of his scrawny neck was even whiter than the rest of his skin, showing where his hair had recently hung longer and freer. He wore a red plaid flannel shirt and stiff new Levi's, both a size too big. The outfit looked like a straitjacket on the delicate kid. As she approached the two boys, a light breeze shook the alders surrounding the dining hall building, the green leaves fluttering nervously. "Hi," the pale boy said to her. "Meet my girlfriend," Ernest said, blinking his eyelashes in mock femininity. "Delia, you present so straight," the other boy said, looking Delia up and down. He sure didn't present straight. His prettiness burst out of the plaid shirt and rugged jeans. "Straight?" Ernest swatted the ridiculous term away. "You gotta be kidding me. This girl's an Amazon, am I right?" The boys waited for an answer. She looked away, pretended to be interested in what the other kids were doing. She wanted to ask what an Amazon was. But she knew, all at once she knew, these kids were queer, homos.
I love that scene, and I just love these kids. I mean, Ernest and Cal, and the friendship at the heart of this book is so beautiful and moving. You write teenagers really well, and I'm struck by just the sweetness of these kids and how real they are, and both in the backstory in Delia's childhood, and also her teammates in the present story. Will you just talk about writing adolescence, and is it a time you remember especially well?
I don't think it's a time I've ever left. Yeah, I love adolescence. Not CE, but NTS. I love young people. I think it's, I just think young people, and I mean, I'm just so heartened today by how, I mean, God, I don't know if all you're watching the TV today, but the young people in Tennessee, it's like, thank you for taking up the work and said, watch the TV if you don't know what I'm talking about. And thank you for the two 27-year-old Justins in Tennessee in the legislature who just got thrown out. Amazing people. And I just feel like young people, I feel like they have, starting at about 12, they have all the truth we'll ever get. And they still know it, and they still believe in it. And then as we get older, we have to put up all these walls just to survive and get through. But at that age, it's so painful because they see and accept the full truth. So they make such great characters because they're so full of just truth and feeling and love. And thank you for saying that friendship between these three characters, Ernest, Cal, and Delia, is at the heart of this book, because that's what I mean when I say don't worry about the conversion therapy, because this love is really the center of the story, and I use the conversion therapy as something to bring them together.
I mean, the other thing, not to linger so more on the conversion therapy, the other thing that struck me about your treatment of that is that there's so much compassion in how even these villains are portrayed on the page. And I want to hate Pastor Quaid. I want to hate Maureen and Pastor Bob and these adults who are causing so much pain in these children, and lifelong pain. And you sort of don't let me fully. And I admire that so much, because I think, you talked about the political situation that we, been surviving as being the sort of seed of this novel. And I think one of the things that has fueled it and also come out of it is that I have trouble seeing people on the other side as being fully human. I have trouble not seeing them as villains, and you don't let me get away with that in this book.
You should hear me walking around my house ranting. I'm full of I'm a different person as a writer than I am as a writer. Much more compassionate, empathetic person as a writer than it. So it's that actually it's really, I love doing that stretch as a writer. Because I don't have it in me, because some of those people I just full on hate, and I'm sorry, because I don't want to be that person who feels that way, but I do have that anger still. But and to me, I would say in the years I've been a writer, that's been the hardest part that I've had to learn, is how to make my antagonists human, because they don't work if they're just all evil. And even in small ways, like you mentioned, Maureen, she's not a pastor, she's one of the counselors. And with her, it was, since she's not on the page much, I just tried to do it in gestures. Like there was a little one there in the part I read where she's, that you can see her pain a little bit. She's obviously in pain, and my character, because she's 13 and still has her open heart, can see that too a little bit. Or the brother, Delia's brother, is a big character in the book, and he's just a mess. But he's really loyal to her. He will do anything for her. And I think that saves him and makes him hard to dismiss, because he really loves his sister, and he saved her. She has survivor's guilt because he gave away a lot to take care of her. So I really have worked on that, because I do think it really, really helps readers love a novel. If they can, sort of do that stretch that I want to be able to do for myself and can't always in my real life, but try to do in my novels.
Yeah. No, and it's beautiful and also maddening to feel something for these people who are causing Delia pain.
Yeah, there's one of the girls on his team, there's a father who gets in her way a lot, and he's racist and he's really obnoxious. But I have him listen, and even in the very first scene he's in, he actually listens to her, and she says, he's actually listening to me, and changes a little bit. And so I just enjoy when I could figure out how to do that a little bit to make them more real, because ultimately the people that are out there now doing evil things, almost always they've had evil things done to them. They are in pain too, and it's hard to know that. And we don't have to forgive them, and we don't have to love them in our real lives. But if we want to look at him as a character and a real person, I think we have to see that.
Yeah, and you do that beautifully. So this is also a sports novel. It's a novel about basketball, but it's not what I think of when I think of a sports novel. There are no breathless, detailed play-by-plays. The games, even the game with the highest stakes, the state championship, all takes place off the page. Mm-hmm. And just on a craft level, as a fellow writer, I was wondering about that decision. And also, were you tempted to use the inherent drama in a basketball game for the novel? Was that this like sparkling temptation that you?
It wasn't. That was a really conscious choice. I love basketball, but reading long accounts of basketball play-by-play does not, there's a tension who won, but it's not really that interesting. What's interesting is the emotional drama between the players. And so I really very consciously want to focus on whatever basketball scene I have, it's actually about what's happening between my characters and not about will they win the game, because really ultimately whether they win the game is not the most interesting part of the story in my mind. Maybe for some readers it is, but I'm not that interested in that again.
I thought that took real restraint.
Yeah, I think I've read enough sports stories where there's long scenes of back and forth, and I just don't think it's that interesting.
No, and all the highest stakes scenes take place in the locker room or on the bus. Or
locker rooms are really interesting. locker rooms and great stuff happens there.
You mentioned Dylan, Delia's brother, who is still living in their childhood house when she moves home. Will you talk about that relationship? Because there's a parallel. There's a girl on her team, Mickey, who also has a close relationship with her brother. Will you talk about this sort of parallel and sibling relationships in general?
Yeah, I'm one of 5 kids, so I have 4 siblings, and I'm really interested in sibling relationships. They are certainly written about plenty, but not as much as romantic relationships or other kind of more power dynamic relationships. And I just think the sibling relationship is really, really interesting. So in an interview I did recently, someone asked if this brother is based on my brother, and it is not. My brothers are very different from this guy. So I just need to say that since this is live streaming. This character in my book is kind of a loser, but as I say, he is really, really loyal to Delia, and he's the one who, so she does this thing, and this I don't think is a spoiler. When she gets out of conversion therapy camp, she's in a pretty bad place because some pretty traumatic stuff happened. And he introduces her to basketball as the healing thing, and it really took. And she practically does I say normally a one-on-one. She plays for Coach Pat Summitt, if you know her, very, very famous women's coach. She practically puts her in place of Jesus and basketball in place of God, and the discipline of basketball really saved her, physically and mentally becoming the best she could possibly be. And her brother gives that to her. He was a really great basketball player himself and probably could have played himself in college, but sort of spun out in saving her. And it's not, most people who have survivor's guilt, it's really not actually the case. It's the person who did not make it, lost because they did, but that's the feeling people have. So, so I just wanted to explore that relationship with Mickey and her brother. I like her brother because he is a character that can play off of my happiness PhD character, who's the janitor at the high school. And a kid who was also, I guess I already said, in high school with my character Delia, but they only knew each other a little bit. So yeah, and they have a close relationship too, Mickey and her brother Z.
Yeah, I love those siblings. Well, should we open it up to questions if people want to? Questions,
I have a question. It's very tangentially related to the novel, but
Hopefully you know everything about the novel at this point.
I know the novel very well. But it was interesting. You just said that you were more empathetic as a writer than you are as a person, and I was just sort of mulling that and thinking about one of the breakdowns that I see in our current society is that we all live on the internet. And it seems that even though everyone's writing, there's no empathy. It seems to me that with words, you cannot change a person's mind. And I'm not just talking about like people and political enemies. I'm also talking about colleagues or just people in one's life. It seems so. I thought that was just kind of interesting to think about. And yeah, so I just wonder if you have thoughts about empathy in the written word.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think where I want to go is the difference between a novel and a tweet.
Yes.
Or an email,
Or what?
an email even.
Or an email
just
even, yeah. I mean, in a novel, we're talking about the basketball scenes. I'm trying to move my readers through, ideally, I would like to make my readers think and feel. But I think you're really going to move people by making them feel. So if they read my novel and actually love these characters, it's going to be harder for them to support some of these things the Christian right is doing. I feel like this is my book against the Christian right, basically. And because they're going to care about these people, and you can't do that in a tweet, and you can't do that in something shorter. You need to go through a whole journey. I don't know. I mean, I think many of us writers wonder whether we're spending our life doing the right thing or whether we should be, out on the street feeding the poor or something. But I like, sometimes I think about storytelling, and I when I go through it in my mind, I think it's really, one of the most unique things that human beings do. I mean, we tell these long stories. I like to think of it as a tradition that goes way back to sitting around the campfire, and people would tell the long story about their day or the work or the gathering for food they did. And I think it's a really, really important way for us to explain ourselves to ourselves, just like I explain myself to myself as I was talking about the rage that I feel. I can like work it out in my storytelling, and I can explain myself to other people. And I think story usually means something a little longer than an explanation or an argument. So that's the best answer I have for that. It works.
Thank you.
That's a
That was
good
good.
answer.
Thank you.
Henry.
What's your take on happiness studies? I mean, at first blush, it sounds ridiculous, to be honest. I mean, doesn't it? I mean, sort of happiness studies.
Aren't you a philosophy professor?
No, I'm a science
Okay.
professor, I'm a policy professor.
Okay.
But I mean, happiness studies, and yet I think there's something useful there, but I'd be interested in your take.
Well, I'm just going to be facetious and say, read the novel. Yeah, I mean, when I first started reading about it, I wrote down the 6 things in some of the books I read about what makes people happy, because I thought they were useful. And one is do creative work, one is be in service to others. And I mean, both of those I know to be true. Community, which we were talking about, being in beautiful places, absolutely, that's true for me, being in beautiful places. The 2 that I found kind of difficult were trust and hope, because as my character says, those are not actionable things. You can't do trust, you can't do hope. You either trust or you can't sort of make yourself do that. So that annoyed me in the stuff I read about in the happiness studies. But that's just a short form of, and so yeah, my character thinks about these things and wants to figure out a way to quantify happiness. And it is kind of silly, but maybe not.
One of my best friends is Norman Bradburn, who's one of the founders of happiness studies. For years, he asked the happiness question on the National Opinion Research Center study, which is the general social survey. Are you happy? And then that's a long timeline of happiness in America.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I just read an article in the New York Times about interviewing Finns, who once again were at the top. Did you guys read this? Once again, we're ranked the happiest people, and they were all like, "No, we're not. We're all very dark and grouchy." But they said that it was because they feel lucky and feel like they have. There's this sort of national sense that they got a good thing and they feel grateful for it, like they shouldn't complain.
So someone asks if they're happy, they say yes. I think there was a question back there. Yeah.
So how do you know when you're done? Do you feel like the outline is fully fleshed out, or do you get to the climax and you're like, or how do you know?
Do you know when you're done?
I know when there's nothing else I can do, and then I have to show it to somebody else. And but
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't work by outline. I'm like an incredibly organized person in all parts of my life except my writing life. And I mean, I'm just, I just write, and then I cut, and then I rewrite, and then I cut. And I think after I show it to enough people and they have said, fix this, fix this, fix this, and I've done it, and I don't know if I have a good answer. Yeah, it's just, you get to a point where you think you've done the best you can, but I mean, always, I will be reading sections out loud in events like this, and I have edited it, and changed it. The book I did for 3 Rooms Press with Pat and Peter, I thought it was done, and Kat said, drop the whole first chapter. And she was absolutely right. I dropped the first chapter, but I thought it was done. So it could always get better.
so true.
Yeah.
So true. Other questions?
Sorry to ask another one, but I'm intrigued with this notion of trust and the sinews of trust in our society. And do you feel that your look at this town and you're thinking about that makes you feel that trust is possible amongst
The place,
America.
meaning this country?
America.
Well, I think, yeah, it doesn't, yes, it is.
Maybe you're not waiting. So,
And, trust politically is just, clearly not working right now. I guess, yeah, it's actually a really good question, because I try to think about, where do I put my trust? And I think it does go back to that question of community. Where are the communities we can trust? This is a community I love right here, both writers community and my queer community. It's like, these are communities that I can trust. That doesn't mean there's no bad actors, but it's like, people who are putting their hearts and minds into doing creative work. That's, to me, what it's all about. And creative work is making things rather than destroying things, to put it very simply. And people who are making beautiful things, beautiful books and beautiful pieces of art and beautiful music. And, that's where I'm going to put my trust to the best of my ability. But yeah, it's hard to just do trust. Jen.
Have you spent time reading or doing talks in these small towns that you're writing about? I'm just really curious as to your experience.
I haven't done a reading in small towns. I've spent a lot of time in the town this book is based in. I've spent a lot of time in small towns talking to people. But no, I actually tried to get a reading in this town, and I almost had one. The librarian who's head of the library is queer, and I thought they were going to take me, but they started ghosting me after saying yes. So I don't know what happened there. So I guess I haven't. I mean, I keep waiting. Just 2 weeks ago, the Proud Boys were right out front of this building, demonstrating. And I keep waiting for, someone to have a look at this cross on the front of the book. Actually, I'm a little nervous with this cover. I love this cover, but I thought, well, queer people are going to look at it and say, hell no. And then maybe the Christian right would go, oh, yeah, let me have a look at that. And, come back to me. I don't think maybe those yet. But I'm kind of ready for the Christian right. I mean, honestly, it's like, you want to have that conversation? Let's have it. Because I know actually a whole lot about Christianity. And, the hypocrisy is the core of what's so enraging. Because in fact, Christianity is supposed to be about love and community, the things I talk about here. One of the fun things in doing this book, and again, a way that I found to counter my own rage was, and this is maybe a little bit of a spoiler. Can I talk about Pastor Carolyn, or is that too much of a spoiler?
No, talk about
Okay. Spoilers either. It's not even that I necessarily forget, but when I hear someone talking about something in a book, and then I read it, it's always something completely different anyway. Anyway, about halfway through the story, there's a pastor who comes in who is what I would call a true Christian. She actually believes in community and inclusivity and compassion. And she totally throws my protagonist off, like, whoa, who is this person? And she was really fun to write. And she came to me quite late in the writing process. I thought, well, this would be fun to have a pastor in the book who's actually a true Christian, who actually, cares. And so she was fun to put in.
Yeah, and those kids at the camp are true Christians, the way they look out for one another and support each other. I mean, there's this wonderful, I don't think this is giving away too much, but they know that they can't express their support for each other through any overt means. They have this secret hug, and when they do this, it's hugging each other, and it's so moving. And
because they aren't allowed to touch each other.
Anybody have other questions?
This might be on my own writing process too, but are there any other novels or other genres of books that were putting yourself in conversation with, or just thinking about as you were putting this book together? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And this is the question we were just talking about. We're afraid of getting when someone asks you, what are you reading lately? I actually read a ton, but I always draw a blank on that question. And Kirsten said she actually bring the list. I do actually have a list somewhere. You know, I mean, one reason I was really happy to do this event with Kirsten is I feel like my book is in conversation with yours to some extent. And I did read your book when I was at Willapa Bay. You've been to Willapa Bay, right? Yeah, which was, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something. But Kirsten's book, and it's back there, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it, called The Five Wounds, is also about a religious expression in a small town, although in your case it's New Mexico. It also has teens as very central characters. I wouldn't exactly say it's the intersection of queerness and religion so much. Would you? It's that they're side by side.
Yeah, because the really religious character is Angel, who's the young lesbian. It's her father. So
Yeah.
I mean, there's a little of that, but
Yeah. But I mean, I would say that I wish I should keep a list of what books I'm reading, because I feel like I'm always in conversation with what I'm reading and with all kinds of things, but you know, I can't draw the titles right now.
No worries, the best part is I can see a book cover in my mind, but can't think of the title either. It's just it'll come to me later.
And I'm gonna say this right now, because later, if any of you do buy a book and want me to sign it, there's this weird thing that happens. I don't know if this happens to you, but when I do book events, I get in a headspace that's completely different from normal life headspace. And I will forget my best friend's names. I mean that literally. So it's like, it's mortifying. And I'll say this, and so please like write your name on a piece of paper and then you know me, it's like, honestly. So if my friend is watching the live stream, she's probably not, because she was at the event at Fabulosa Books in the Castro last week, but this is a friend. I've known her for years. She's produced events at the Oakland Library for me. I love her. She's fantastic. I could not come up with her name, and she put the book in front of me, and I drew a blank. It was one of the most mortifying moments in my life. I mean, this was not someone I could say, "What is your name?" So I tried. This is a try. I go, so who should I sign it to? You know, like in case it's her mother or something. Just me. So then I tried my next trick. I've done this before. I go, okay, like spelling, and you know, if it's like Peg, P-E-G, like, thank God it was a name that has a lot of different spellings. And so I just totally played it off. It's like, oh yeah, I know you spell it, and she does spell it in unusual ways. Oh yeah, that's right. I know. So, if you buy a book, if you want me to sign it, please tell me your name.
that's happened to me before. To a current student whose name I knew, I just seen her. And she was like, E-M-I-L-Y.
She goes, yeah, some people do I. So you know.
I was going to ask, and I'm still asking this, about how this piece and how in general your books are in conversation with one another, in addition to something you're reading at the time. Or not, but then I'm also curious about, do you ever forget your characters' names while you're writing, and then your characters have these experiences? So those are two, I'm asking those both at the same time.
I have forgotten my characters' names in events like this, but not while I'm writing usually. I can just look at the page.
But that's such a good question. I mean, because when I first came to your work, I thought of you as the science writer, and because you write about climate and biology and landscape and so much in your work. And over the years, I still see that in your collection of Falls. There is a lot of that, but also many other things. And so I love that question, how you see your books in conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so you mean like my books in conversation with my own previous books? Yes. Oh, okay. See, I missed that. I didn't get that part. That's an interesting question, Bella. Yeah, it is such a good question. One thing I hope to not be writing the same book over and over and over again. You know, some authors do, and so and so my obsessions in life changed, and you know, write about what I'm obsessed about at the moment. But I mean, talking about this whole happiness question, honestly, I think that might be like the core piece throughout it all, because, you know, we all are struggling with our own happiness and our own contentment and the choices we're making in life. And so when I was writing, you know, for instance, I've written a lot about Antarctica, and that started because I heard about a grant where you could go to Antarctica for free if you wrote about Antarctica. I'm kid you not. I mean, and I love beautiful places. I love writing about place and setting, and I knew going to Antarctica would make me very happy, and it did. And so you know, I kept writing about it because it was such an extraordinarily beautiful place, and it's chock full of scientists. And I do love science because I feel like scientists are the people who are coming up with the answers that we need. And you know, I mean, one thing I like to think about a lot is why these ultra religious people think they are in conflict with scientists. Nothing makes me feel more spiritual, like woo, than reading deep science stuff, you know? So I like thinking, so there's a conversation right there between my science, you know, stuff about Antarctica and about spirituality. To me, it's all sort of part of the same question of how do we live and what are the right ways to find answers, or what are good ways to find answers.
You've also written in a lot of different genres. You've written nonfiction, short stories, YA. When you get an idea, do you know what it's going to be? Do you know this is a novel-sized idea? This is a
Not really. I mean, I mainly write adult fiction. I have written a little nonfiction, not a lot. And No Stop This Now is my first YA novel. And oh my gosh, I've been wanting to write that book, and I think they have copies back there for years. But I kept thinking it had to be, it's a very true story. So I thought I had to write it as nonfiction. And because I don't really write nonfiction, I get really hung up in nonfiction because for me, nonfiction means literally nonfiction. You can't make shit up, which isn't the case for many nonfiction writers. And so it was going to be kind of a boring story because I wanted to, you know, so in the end, I wrote as a novel. It's like 95% true, but I collapsed a couple of years. I brought in a love story that actually happened to me a year later and put it in it, you know, so I was able to do that. And I was able to focus on the characters and their relationships rather than all the meetings I went to, for instance, to make that happen. So a lot for me, it's a matter of just thinking about who's the audience I want to reach. And with that book, No Stopping Us Now, I really wanted to reach kids. I finally figured out, oh, you know, I want to have this conversation about activism and what that means and what my generation did and what they can do and what they are doing now. And I have had a lot of those conversations with young people. It's been really, really great. So yeah, it's just choosing. Yeah. I guess like one last question, because I feel like we should let you all go.
On that note, you know, do you think that your books have been able to make people, you know, incite people to rise into activism or to have your books formed an action from the reader besides just saying, oh, great book, you know, and my name is probably EMIL1.
Well, you know, No Stopping Us Now absolutely has.
Yeah.
I got to go back to my high school, Ida B. Wells High School, last week, 2 weeks ago, and talk to those kids there now about what I did there 50 years ago and what they're doing now. I think it's definitely has done that. I hope Tell the Rest will also get people to speak up a little bit more against the religious right, against harmful practices against queer people. I hope that by finding these characters and caring, and I mean, I think all fiction does that. I think if you can reach people's hearts, they might speak up more and take more action. That's the whole point, I hope, of writing the stories. I think we should probably end on that note.
I think you should all read this book. It's just sparkle. It's really, really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you both.